During the Second World War, millions of soldiers faced exposure to the elements on a daily basis. Conventional wisdom and, most popular histories assumed that armies relied on tents, temporary barracks, or makeshift lean-tos for shelter. The reality was far more nuanced. Across multiple theatres of war, from the frozen fields of northern Europe to the Pacific Islands, soldiers who survived severe weather rarely relied on canvas tents. Instead, military engineers and frontline units adopted a range of practical, low-tech shelters that prioritize protection, concealment, and, honestly, durability. Some of these shelters, built under extreme pressure with minimal resources, could withstand storms that would shred standard tentage in minutes. The overlooked story of these structures is not only a tale of ingenuity, but also an enduring lesson in preparation, adaptability, and, the underestimated value of simple engineering in survival situations. The limitations of tents became painfully clear in the field. Early in the conflict, armies often assumed that tents would suffice for temporary encampments. In training manuals and military supply lists, canvas shelters were prescribed as the standard solution for housing troops. However, when deployed, the weaknesses of these tents became obvious. Heavy rain pooled in poorly pitched fabric, freezing winds tore canvas walls, and even moderate snow loads could collapse entire encampments. Soldiers stationed on the Western Front in 1940 reported tents collapsing under early winter snowfall, leaving entire units exposed to hypothermia. In the Pacific, tropical storms ripped through supposedly sturdy tents, forcing entire battalions to sleep soaked or to seek shelter under whatever natural cover was available. Commanders quickly realized that relying on a standardized, one-size-fits-all shelter could compromise both troop readiness and morale. Military engineers began turning to semi-permanent earth and timber structures. In Europe, this often meant integrating natural topography into construction. Dugouts, partially underground chambers reinforced with timber or corrugated steel, became increasingly common. These structures were insulated by earth, protected against wind, and in many cases invisible from the air. German forces, particularly on the Eastern Front, perfected the use of reinforced bunkers made of sandbags and timber frames to withstand both artillery and the harsh winter. The Allies quickly observed that soldiers who spent time in these shelters experienced fewer frostbite cases and maintained higher energy levels during prolonged campaigns. Adaptation to local conditions shaped survival strategy. In the Pacific theater, where, heavy rainfall and humidity made earthworks pretty much impractical, soldiers relied on raised wooden platforms, palm frond coverings, and rock-lined trenches. These structures were simple but, honestly, quite effective, allowing water to drain quickly and keeping soldiers elevated above the swampy, insect-infested ground. In Northern Europe, the focus shifted to snow and wind management. Dugouts were often camouflaged with branches and turf, providing both thermal insulation and, concealment from reconnaissance planes. These adaptations highlight a lesson often overlooked in popular histories. Survival in war is rarely about high-tech solutions. It is about understanding local conditions and working with them. The human element of shelter construction influenced morale and resilience. Constructing these shelters was rarely the work of engineers alone. Soldiers themselves took an active role, sometimes spending hours each day reinforcing walls, digging drainage trenches, or layering insulation. Units that invested effort in improving their living conditions frequently demonstrated higher resilience and operational effectiveness. Anecdotal accounts from the Italian campaign in 1943 note that soldiers who constructed semi-permanent shelters were more willing to engage in night operations or long-range reconnaissance because they knew they could return to a reliable refuge. The psychological benefit of having a secure, dry, and relatively warm space cannot be overstated. The simple act of shaping one's environment, even under the pressures of war, became a survival strategy in itself. Materials and design innovations carried lessons beyond the battlefield. The widespread use of corrugated steel, for example, allowed small units to erect durable shelters with minimal labor. Timber framing and sandbag reinforcement demonstrated a principle still taught in modern survival training. A well-insulated, partially buried structure drastically reduces exposure-related casualties. In addition, modular design, where sections of a dugout or bunker could be extended, reinforced or relocated, allowed troops to adjust to shifting front lines without losing the protective benefits of their work. These lessons influenced Cold War-era military fortifications and later civilian disaster preparedness programs, showing that knowledge developed under extreme duress can have enduring peacetime applications. Storms tested the limits of ingenuity and foresight. Several documented cases illustrate how these shelters outlasted conditions that would have destroyed conventional tents. During the winter of 1941–42 near Leningrad, German and Soviet troops alike relied on dugouts and timber-reinforced trenches. While tents disintegrated in sub-zero temperatures combined with heavy snowfall, dugouts maintained interior temperatures several degrees higher than the ambient air, allowing soldiers to survive multi-day blizzards. In the Pacific, typhoons repeatedly threatened temporary camps, yet units using simple, elevated wooden shelters lined with leaves and planks remained largely intact. These real-world tests confirmed that even rudimentary engineering, when thoughtfully applied, can have a decisive impact on human endurance. Lessons for modern survivalists and historians alike. For survivalists, the principles are pretty straightforward. You want to prioritize protection from wind, water, and those extreme temperatures. It's also wise to integrate natural materials wherever possible, and honestly, investing some labor in making even temporary structures more resilient can make a world of difference. From a historical perspective, these shelters really do challenge the assumption that mobility and speed always take precedence over durability. Soldiers who could construct even basic semi-permanent shelters were, more often than not, able to operate for longer periods, endure harsher conditions, and preserve unit cohesion. They illustrate a form of wartime ingenuity that's easy to overlook, simply because it doesn't show up on battle maps or in victory parades, yet it's absolutely foundational to any prolonged campaign. You know, the story of these often overlooked shelters really reshapes our understanding of wartime experience. When we take a closer look at the Second World War through the lens of these structures, a much more complex picture starts to emerge. Combat operations, well, they were only one aspect of survival. The daily struggle against weather and exposure shaped the decisions of commanders, engineers, and soldiers alike. The development and refinement of semi-permanent shelters reveal how necessity, in fact, drives innovation. They show how human endurance is supported by small but deliberate interventions, and how sometimes the simplest architectural choices can actually determine the difference between life and death. You know, remembering these lessons allows historians and enthusiasts alike to appreciate the depth of preparation, observation, and adaptation that sustained millions of troops in extreme conditions. Understanding small decisions really illuminates the human experience of war. It's often these tiny choices that, well, shape the course of events in ways we might not expect. Ultimately, the story of World War II shelters is a reminder that history is not just about battles, treaties, or troop movements. It's about those day-to-day decisions that allowed individuals to survive and, honestly, to continue their mission under the most challenging circumstances. Recognizing the ingenuity behind these often overlooked shelters provides insight into human resilience and the practical problem-solving that occurs under extreme stress. These lessons are, without a doubt, as relevant today for anyone interested in survival, engineering, or history as they were for soldiers navigating a war that tested both human ingenuity and endurance to the utmost. If you value in-depth historical analysis and want to explore more stories that reveal the unseen realities of warfare, do consider subscribing to Iron Age Instincts and share this video with others who want to understand history beyond the textbook.